I sat across from Reed in the glass-walled conference room, watching his smug smile spread wider. The entire floor staff could see us through the transparent walls. My 8 years at Baker Enterprises meant nothing to this man. "You're done here, Molly," he said, sliding my termination letter across the polished table. "We don't need dead weight." My hands trembled as I stared at the official letterhead. Around us, my coworkers pretended to work while stealing glances at the spectacle. Reed leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying every second of my humiliation. I fought back tears, clenching my jaw so hard it hurt. This wasn't just about losing my job. This was about being thrown away like garbage after everything I'd built for this company. The vendor relationships, the streamlined systems, the major contracts I'd secured, all forgotten. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as silence stretched between us. Reed tapped his expensive pen against the table, waiting for me to break down. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'll regret this." His laugh echoed off the glass walls as I stood up, dignity intact despite the storm raging inside me. 2 months earlier, everything had been different. Reed arrived at Baker Enterprises like a hurricane, all flash and promises. The board ate up his fancy presentations about modernizing operations and maximizing efficiency. I watched from my desk as he strutted through the office in his $1,000 suits, shaking hands and making grand gestures. Within his first week, he threw an elaborate welcome party in the main conference room. Catered food, expensive wine, speeches about our bright future. But I noticed things others missed. During his first management meeting, Reed dismissed our oldest vendor contract without reading the fine print. He canceled our safety training program to cut unnecessary costs. When I tried to explain why these decisions were dangerous, he waved me off. "Molly, you're thinking too small," he said during one meeting, his voice dripping with condescension. "We need fresh perspectives, not outdated approaches." The other managers nodded along, afraid to challenge the new boss. I felt my stomach drop as I realized what kind of leader we were dealing with. He was making mistakes that would cost us dearly. But nobody wanted to hear warnings from someone he'd already labeled as old school. Back in the present, my personal belongings were being shoved into a cardboard box. 8 years of my professional life reduced to a few photos, a coffee mug, and some office supplies. Reed stood nearby, making sure I didn't steal anything. "Don't trip on your way out," he said with that same awful smirk. My coworkers avoided eye contact, too scared to say goodbye properly. They knew speaking up might put their own jobs at risk. The fear in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus from accounting pretended to study his computer screen, but I caught him watching me. As I passed his desk, he mouthed something that made my heart skip. "He's making a mistake." The security guard waited by the elevator to escort me out. Standard procedure for terminated employees, but it felt like a walk of shame. Reed watched from his glass office, probably already planning his next victim. I carried my box through the lobby, where I'd walked confidently for 8 years. The receptionist gave me a sad smile, but couldn't say anything with Reed's eyes on us. The automatic doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh, cutting me off from the only professional home I'd ever known. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands shaking as reality hit me. 8 years of loyalty, thrown away in 10 minutes. I'd built relationships with every major vendor, streamlined our supply chain, and secured contracts that kept this place profitable. Reed had no idea what he'd just destroyed. The worst part wasn't even losing my job. It was the public humiliation, the way he made sure everyone saw my downfall. He wanted to send a message about what happened to people who questioned his authority. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. The initial shock faded, replaced by something much stronger. I'd never been the type to just roll over and accept defeat. That night, I opened my laptop and started updating my resume. But this wasn't going to be a desperate job search. I had skills, experience, and knowledge that Reed didn't understand the value of. I pulled up LinkedIn and began reaching out to contacts I'd built over the years. If Reed wanted to play games, I was ready to show him what happened when you underestimated Molly Thompson. My phone buzzed with responses almost immediately. Apparently, My reputation in the industry was stronger than I'd realized. 3 days later, I sat across from the CEO of Drake & Co., Baker Enterprises' biggest competitor. They'd been struggling to keep up with our market share for years, but I could see exactly why. "Your supply chain is hemorrhaging money," I told him during the interview. "You're using outdated routing systems and paying premium prices for vendors who are overcharging you." His eyes lit up as I explained how I could fix their problems. Everything I'd learned at Baker Enterprises could be applied here, but better. Without Reed's interference, I could actually implement the improvements I'd been suggesting for years. "I know your previous vendor contracts inside and out," I continued. "I also know which suppliers are reliable and which ones will leave you hanging." The CEO leaned forward, clearly interested. We talked for 2 hours about logistics, vendor management, and supply chain optimization. By the end, I could tell he was impressed. "When can you start?" he asked. I smiled for the first time since getting fired. "How about Monday?" Walking out of that building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about going to work. Reed had no idea what was coming. My first day at Drake & Co. felt like stepping into a world of possibility. No more walking on eggshells around an ego-driven boss. No more having my ideas dismissed before I could fully explain them. I immediately started reaching out to vendor partners that Reed had mistreated. These were companies I'd worked with for years, people who respected my judgment and trusted my word. "Molly," exclaimed Tom from Riverside Logistics when I called. "I heard what happened at Baker. Reed's loss is everyone else's gain." I explained my new position and how we could work together. Within hours, I had meetings scheduled with 3 major suppliers who were already frustrated with Reed's management style. The best part was reconnecting with Amanda from Premier Supply Co. She'd been furious when Reed suddenly changed their contract terms without warning. "We'd rather work with you anyway," she told me over lunch. "Reed treats vendors like they're disposable. You understand that we're partners." By the end of my first week, I'd already secured 2 vendor agreements that would save Drake & Co. significant money. My new boss was thrilled with the progress. Reed had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the best thing that can happen is getting pushed out of your comfort zone. 2 weeks into my new job, I got a text from my former coworker Marcus. "Reed's changes are blowing up. Late shipments, refunds piling up. People are freaking out." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of satisfaction and concern. I'd predicted this would happen, but seeing it play out was surreal. Part of me felt bad for my former colleagues who were dealing with the fallout, but a bigger part of me felt vindicated. Every warning I'd given Reed was coming true. Exactly as I'd predicted. I texted Marcus back, "Sorry to hear that. Hope everyone's okay." I kept the conversation brief. Getting involved in Baker Enterprises drama wouldn't help anyone, and I needed to focus on my new role. My boss at Drake & Co. called me into his office that afternoon with exciting news. "Molly, if we can win the Jackson Industries contract, it'll be huge for us," he said. "That's a multi-million-dollar deal that could really put us ahead of Baker Enterprises." I knew that contract well. Reed had been bragging about bidding on it just before he fired me. Now I had the chance to beat him at his own game. "I can craft a proposal that'll blow them away," I told my boss. I spent 3 days crafting the perfect proposal for Jackson Industries. Every detail was flawless, from pricing to delivery schedules to quality guarantees. I used everything I knew about what clients really wanted: reliability, communication, and fair pricing. The proposal included partnerships with vendors I'd just secured, giving us advantages that Baker Enterprises couldn't match. While Reed was burning bridges, I was building them. When I submitted the proposal, I felt confident, but tried not to get my hopes up. This was a competitive bid, and Baker Enterprises had more resources than Drake & Co. But 3 days later, my phone rang with the news that changed everything. "Congratulations, Molly," said the Jackson Industries procurement manager. "Your proposal was outstanding. We're awarding the contract to Drake & Co." My heart pounded as she continued. "We're also terminating our existing agreement with Baker Enterprises, effective immediately. We've had too many issues with late deliveries and poor communication." I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. Not only had we won the contract, but Baker Enterprises had lost it. Reed's mismanagement was finally catching up with him. I walked to my boss's office to share the news. His reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. Pure joy mixed with disbelief. Word spread quickly through the industry. Jackson Industries was a major client, and their decision to switch from Baker Enterprises to Drake & Co. sent shockwaves through the market. Within a week, 2 other companies reached out to discuss switching their contracts too. Reed's reputation for poor vendor management and unreliable service was becoming industry knowledge. I didn't gloat or spread rumors. I simply focused on delivering excellent results for our new clients. But I couldn't help feeling satisfied when Marcus texted me updates about the chaos at Baker Enterprises. 3 more vendors terminated their contracts this week. One message read, "Reed is losing it." My phone also started buzzing with LinkedIn messages from former colleagues. They weren't just reaching out to chat, they were quietly asking about opportunities at Drake & Co. The industry was small, and word traveled fast. People were starting to realize that Reed's flashy promises couldn't replace solid operational knowledge. I kept my responses professional but friendly. I wasn't ready to start recruiting my former colleagues yet, but I made mental notes about who might be worth considering later. The momentum was building, and Reed had no idea how much trouble he was really in. Marcus gave me the inside scoop on Reed's meltdown during their Monday morning meeting. Apparently, losing the Jackson contract had sent him into a rage that the entire office could hear. He was yelling at everyone, Marcus texted, threatening layoffs, blaming the sales team, saying we were all incompetent. I could picture the scene perfectly. Reed wasn't the type to accept responsibility for his mistakes. It was always someone else's fault when things went wrong. "Half the staff is updating their resumes," Marcus added. "People are scared." The text that really caught my attention came later that day. Karen from operations just resigned. She said she couldn't work for someone who didn't respect her expertise. Karen had trained me when I first started at Baker Enterprises. She was one of the most knowledgeable people in the company, someone who understood every aspect of our operations. If Reed was losing people like her, he was in serious trouble. I felt bad for my former colleagues, but I also realized this created opportunities. If talented people were leaving Baker Enterprises, maybe some of them would be interested in joining Drake & Co. My boss had already mentioned wanting to expand our team. Reed called me at 11:30 on a Thursday night. I was already in bed, but his name on my caller ID made me sit up straight. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his drunken rambling with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "I hope you're happy ruining my company," his slurred voice said. "You think you're so smart, stealing our clients and our people. This isn't over, Molly." I deleted the message immediately. Reed was clearly spiraling, and I wanted no part of his breakdown. The fact that he was calling me drunk at midnight showed just how far he'd fallen. The next morning, my boss called me into his office with a huge smile. "Molly, the board wants to promote you to Director of Operations," he said. "Your work over the past month has saved this company millions of dollars." The promotion came with a significant salary increase and equity in the company. More importantly, it gave me the authority to make strategic decisions that could really impact our growth. As I walked back to my desk, I thought about Reed's angry voicemail. He accused me of ruining his company, but the truth was simpler. I was succeeding while he was failing. That was his problem, not mine. My next move was subtle but devastating. I convinced 3 key suppliers to sign long-term exclusive agreements with Drake & Co. These weren't just any suppliers. They were the ones Reed depended on most heavily. The negotiations took weeks, but I knew exactly what each supplier needed: better payment terms, respect for their expertise, and reliable communication. Everything Reed had failed to provide. When Premier Supply Co. signed their exclusive deal, Amanda called me personally to express her excitement. "Working with you feels like a partnership again," she said. "Reed treated us like we were interchangeable, but you understand our value." The ripple effects were immediate. Baker Enterprises suddenly found themselves scrambling to find alternative suppliers for basic materials. Their costs went up while their reliability went down. I learned about Reed's desperation through industry contacts. He was calling suppliers at all hours, offering increasingly desperate terms to secure basic materials. Then I saw the headline that made everything real. Baker Enterprises faces lawsuit for breach of contract. A major client was suing them for failing to deliver on time. Reed's house of cards was starting to collapse, and I hadn't had to do anything unethical or illegal. I'd simply provided better service and treated people with respect. Reed's attempts to fight back were as predictable as they were ineffective. He started slashing prices to try winning back clients, but his quality control had deteriorated so badly that low prices couldn't compensate. I heard through the grapevine that he was offering Jackson Industries a 30% discount to return. They declined, citing reliability concerns and communication issues. The most telling sign of his desperation came when Marcus texted me. Reed's been calling investors all week, begging for cash infusions. I looked up Baker Enterprises' financial situation and wasn't surprised by what I found. Their stock price had dropped 40% in 3 months. Several major investors had pulled out entirely. Reed had managed to destroy in months what had taken years to build. His focus on flashy presentations and cost-cutting had blinded him to the fundamentals of running a logistics company. Meanwhile, Drake & Co. was thriving. We'd increased our client base by 60%, and our profit margins were the highest in company history. My phone rang with another opportunity. A major manufacturing company wanted to discuss switching from Baker Enterprises to us. "We've heard great things about your operations," their CEO told me. "Can we schedule a meeting?" I scheduled it for the following week. The staff exodus from Baker Enterprises accelerated as word spread about opportunities at Drake & Co. I was careful about who I hired, only bringing over people whose skills and work ethic I trusted completely. Karen from operations was the first to reach out directly. "Molly, I can't work for Reed anymore," she said during our coffee meeting. "He doesn't listen to anyone, and he's making decisions that put our clients at risk." I brought Karen in as my deputy director. Her knowledge of logistics operations was invaluable, and she helped me identify other top performers who might be worth recruiting. Soon, Marcus applied for a position in our accounting department. During his interview, he shared insights that shocked me. "Reed's been asking around about you," he said quietly. "He wants to know what you're doing, who you're working with, everything. People think he's planning something." I thanked Marcus for the warning, though I wasn't particularly worried. Reed's track record spoke for itself. He was more likely to hurt himself than anyone else. We hired Marcus the following week. His inside knowledge of Baker Enterprises' financial problems helped us position our bids more strategically. The writing was on the wall, and everyone could see it. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports. Reed's name on my caller ID made me pause, but this time I answered. "Molly," his voice sounded different. No arrogance, no condescension, just exhaustion and desperation. "I need to talk to you." "I'm listening," I said carefully. "I need you to consult for us. I'll pay whatever you want." The words seemed to hurt him physically. "The company is in trouble, and I think you might be the only one who can help." I let the silence stretch between us. 3 months ago, this man had humiliated me in front of the entire office. He'd called me dead weight and made sure my firing was as public as possible. Now he was begging for my help. "We'll talk," I finally said. "But if I agree to this, it'll be on my terms. Completely." "Anything," he said quickly. "Whatever you want." I took a deep breath, thinking about all the people at Baker Enterprises who didn't deserve to suffer because of Reed's incompetence. "I'll think about it and get back to you," I told him. The phone call ended, but I knew this was just the beginning of a very different kind of conversation. Walking back into Baker Enterprises felt surreal. The same lobby, the same elevators, but everything had changed. Employees who used to avoid eye contact now looked at me with something approaching hope. The office felt different too, quieter, more tense. Half the desks were empty, and the remaining staff looked stressed and overworked. Reed waited in the same conference room where he'd fired me 3 months earlier. He looked terrible, pale, thin, with dark circles under his eyes. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by barely contained panic. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing awkwardly as I entered. I sat down across from him and placed a thick contract on the table. Before we discuss anything, you need to understand how this works. His eyes fixed on the papers with obvious dread. This isn't me coming back to work for you, I continued. This is Drake & Co., providing emergency consulting services to prevent Baker Enterprises from complete collapse. I slid the contract toward him. My terms are in there. Read every word before you sign anything. Reed's hands shook slightly as he picked up the papers. The power dynamic in this room had completely reversed, and we both knew it. Reed's face grew paler as he read through my terms. Drake & Co. would provide temporary operational support to Baker Enterprises, but at premium consulting rates that would cost them significantly more than my old salary. These prices, he started to protest, are non-negotiable, I finished. You need expertise that you can't get anywhere else. Emergency consulting comes at emergency prices. The contract also included strict performance requirements. Any violations would result in immediate termination of our agreement, leaving Baker Enterprises back where they started. You'll also be working directly with me, I added. No middle managers, no committee decisions. When I give recommendations, they get implemented immediately. Reed looked like he might be sick, but he had no choice. His company was hemorrhaging money and clients daily. Without intervention, Baker Enterprises would be bankrupt within months. There's one more thing, I said calmly. I'll be personally overseeing compliance with all vendor contracts and client agreements. No more unilateral changes or broken promises. He signed the contract without reading the final pages. Desperation had made him careless, which was exactly how he'd gotten into this mess in the first place. The papers were barely dry when I started making calls to assess the real damage. My first day back at Baker Enterprises revealed the full scope of Reed's destruction. Vendor relationships were shattered, client confidence was at an all-time low, and employee morale was practically non-existent. The most shocking discovery was how much money they were losing daily. Reed's price cuts had eliminated their profit margins entirely. They were literally paying clients to take their services. During our afternoon meeting, I laid out the harsh reality. You have maybe 6 weeks of operating capital left, I told Reed. After that, you'll need to start laying off core staff or declare bankruptcy. He buried his face in his hands. What do we do? We implement the changes I recommended months ago before you fired me for suggesting them. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Everything I'd warned him about had come true exactly as predicted. I spent the rest of the day meeting with remaining staff members. Their relief at seeing competent leadership was obvious, but I noticed something else. They were looking to me for guidance, not Reed. His authority was slipping away in his own company, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The Industry Trade magazine feature came out 2 weeks into my consulting work. Turnaround Specialist, How Molly Thompson Saved Drake & Co. was the headline, with a photo of me in my new office. The article detailed Drake & Co.'s remarkable growth and subtly mentioned our emergency consulting work with struggling competitors. Anyone in the industry would know exactly which company they meant. Reed called me as soon as the magazine hit newsstands. Did you plan this? He demanded. I was interviewed about Drake & Co.'s success, I replied calmly. The journalist asked about our consulting services. I answered honestly. The article's timing was perfect. It reminded the industry that competent leadership existed while highlighting Baker Enterprises' dependence on outside help. That afternoon, I got word that Reed's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. According to my sources, several board members were asking serious questions about Reed's leadership and the company's future. The writing was on the wall. Reed's tenure as CEO was coming to an end, and everyone knew it, except maybe Reed himself. But I had work to do. People's jobs depended on stabilizing this company, regardless of what happened to Reed. The board meeting lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, Reed emerged looking like he'd aged years in a single day. He walked past my temporary office without making eye contact. 20 minutes later, Karen knocked on my door with the news I'd been expecting. The board voted to remove Reed as CEO, she said quietly, effective immediately. I nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Reed had brought this on himself, but watching someone's career implode was never pleasant. Who's taking over? I asked. Interim CEO is the board chair. but they're actively searching for a permanent replacement. Reed appeared in my doorway an hour later, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "I hope you're happy," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You planned this whole thing, didn't you?" I looked up from the vendor contracts I was reviewing. "I warned you this would happen. You chose not to listen." He started to respond, then seemed to deflate. The fight went out of him as reality hit. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now we try to save what's left of the company you nearly destroyed." The final humiliation came when the board offered Reed a choice: sign over partial operational control to Drake & Co., or watch Baker Enterprises declare bankruptcy within the month. I watched from across the conference table as Reed's lawyer explained his options. His face was a mask of barely controlled emotion. Anger, shame, and defeat, all warring for dominance. "This gives Drake & Co. significant influence over major operational decisions," the lawyer continued. "Essentially, you'll be ceding control of day-to-day operations." Reed's hands trembled as he held the pen. 3 months ago, he'd been the king of this company, firing people at will and making grand pronouncements about the future. Now he was signing away his power to the woman he'd called dead weight. "I need guarantees about employee retention," he said weakly. "You're not in a position to make demands," I replied. "But I'll do everything possible to save jobs. That's why I'm here." He signed the papers with shaking hands, the scratching of the pen the only sound in the silent room. When it was done, he looked at me with something that might have been respect mixed with resentment. The irony was complete. 2 days later, Reed asked to speak with me privately. We met in his old office, which he was being forced to vacate by the end of the week. "I need to thank you," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "You're saving my company." I studied his face, looking for any trace of the arrogant man who'd fired me. He seemed genuinely broken, stripped of all the bluster and false confidence. "I'm not saving your company," I corrected him. "I'm saving the people you nearly ruined. The employees who trusted you, the clients who depended on reliable service, the vendors who needed stable partnerships." He winced at each point, understanding the full weight of his failures. "I was wrong about you," he admitted quietly. "About everything." "Yes, you were." We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. I felt no need to make this easier for him. "Will you at least consider staying on permanently?" he asked finally. "The board would approve whatever salary you wanted." I shook my head. "I have a good job at Drake & Co. This consulting arrangement is temporary." His shoulders sagged as he absorbed this final rejection. I spent my last week at Baker Enterprises, ensuring the transition would be smooth. The new interim CEO was competent and understood the challenges ahead. My former team was thriving under proper leadership again. It reminded me why I'd loved working here originally, when the company had been focused on results instead of politics. Marcus found me packing up my temporary office on Thursday afternoon. "Have you heard?" he asked with a grin. "Reed's selling his shares. He's leaving the company entirely." I wasn't surprised. Reed's reputation in the industry was destroyed. His best option was to cash out and try something completely different. "Word is he's moving to another state?" Marcus continued. "Starting over somewhere people don't know what happened here." I felt a pang of something that might have been pity. Reed had brought his downfall on himself, but rebuilding a career from scratch wasn't easy for anyone. "What about you?" I asked Marcus. "Are you staying or coming back to Drake & Co.?" "Staying," he said. "The new management team is actually competent. It feels like a different company already." That afternoon, I said goodbye to colleagues I'd known for years, wishing them luck with their fresh start. On my final day, I was gathering my things when I noticed Reed standing by the window in what used to be his office. The room was already being cleared out for his replacement. Our eyes met through the glass wall, and for a moment time seemed frozen. He looked like a shadow of his former self, defeated, diminished, and alone. I thought about walking over to say goodbye, but decided against it. We'd said everything that needed saying. Instead, I took the elevator down to the lobby, where my Drake & Co. company car waited. As we pulled away from Baker Enterprises, I caught a glimpse of Reed still standing at that window, watching me leave. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I'd walked out of this building carrying a cardboard box, publicly humiliated and professionally devastated. Now I was leaving in a company car, having saved the jobs of dozens of people and secured my own future in the process. The building grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. I smiled and looked forward toward whatever came next. 6 months later, I sat in my corner office at Drake & Co., finally at peace with how everything had played out. The view from my window showed the city skyline, a constant reminder of how far I'd come. Baker Enterprises had survived and was slowly rebuilding under new management. Several former colleagues had reached out to thank me for saving their jobs during the crisis. Reed had indeed moved across the country and started over in a completely different industry. I heard he was working for someone else now, hopefully learning humility along the way. The best part wasn't the revenge or the vindication. It was the knowledge that I'd handled everything with integrity. I hadn't needed to destroy anyone or break any rules. I'd simply been better at my job than the person who replaced me. My assistant knocked and entered with the afternoon mail. Among the usual documents was a handwritten thank you note from one of the Baker Enterprises employees whose job I'd helped save. As I read her grateful words, I realized something important. The best revenge really is success. Reed had tried to make me disappear, but instead, he'd freed me to find where I truly belonged. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened.